Good evening and welcome to Solidarity on Tap and happy Earth Day. My name is Chris Kerr with the Ignatian Solidarity Network, and on behalf of everyone at ISN, as well as our national Solidarity on Tap sponsors, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, Jesuit Volunteer Corps Northwest, Jesuitical Podcast of America Media, the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University, Mary Noel Lay Missioners, and the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry. Thanks to everyone across the Ignatian family for joining us. For over 15 years, the Ignatian Solidarity Network has been uniting the Ignatian family. That means the Jesuit network, as well as those who are inspired to work for justice through the spiritual tradition of St. Ignatius of Loyola, to build a more just world through faith-based social justice formation, education, and advocacy. If you haven't already, please check out our website, ignatiansolidarity.net. and like and follow us on social media to get the latest advocacy alerts, educational resources, and much more. Now, Solidarity on Tap usually takes place in cities across the country, bringing together members of the Ignatian family. And even though we're gathering virtually tonight, the goal of Solidarity on Tap is the same: to invite people to enjoy fellowship, maybe with a drink in hand, and to hear powerful reflections from members of the network engaged in work for justice. In order to build and enjoy fellowship tonight, I encourage you to utilize the comment section on Facebook or YouTube, or post a tweet on Twitter with the hashtag ISNLive to let us know your institution or just you are represented here tonight. And please know you can post your comments and questions for our guest speaker this evening on either Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube as well. Now, as we join together as an Ignatian family on this 50th anniversary of Earth Day, we recognize that we do so in a different way than we had planned to due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are holding all of the people affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in our prayers in a special way today, at a time when we feel the truth shared in Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, the idea that we are all connected in newer and deeper ways. We hope that this conversation provides us the opportunity to explore the important environmental work that is still being done and reflect on a hope-filled future. So with this in mind, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Molly Burhans. Molly is the founder and executive director of GoodLands, a nonprofit digital mapping firm that focuses on using Catholic resources, especially land, to do good for people as well as the environment. Molly has a MS in ecological design from the Conway School and a BA in philosophy from Canisius College. Molly was the chief cartographer for the first global data-based maps of the Catholic Church and has exhibited these on numerous occasions in the Vatican. She's been involved with the Vatican Youth Symposium, Vatican Arts and Technology Council, United Nations Youth Assembly, and the Buckminster Fuller Catalyst Program. Molly is the 2020 Young Champion of the Earth Laureate for North America 2020. This is the highest UN environmental award for youth, and it is the first time that a faith-based organization's work has been recognized. So we're very excited to welcome Molly this evening. So Molly, thanks for being with us tonight. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris.
It's great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're glad to have you and excited to talk about all this great work at GoodLands. I have to admit, I'm kind of a data nerd. I love maps. Any opportunity to talk about maps is exciting, and to do it on Earth Day and to do it with a drink in hand is even better. So it's so good to be with you, and really looking forward to this. Now, Molly, I was hoping that you could tell us how GoodLands came about, and in particular, I'd love to hear about the ways that that your kind of events in your life kind of led you to this. I know you went to Canisius and maybe that was part of it, but tell us about it and tell us about kind of what happened in that formation that led to this project taking place.
Great. Well, it's a very, I think, interesting kind of story. I went to Canisius College, and when I entered college, I wasn't a practicing Catholic. My family had left the church when I was a kid, and I really found so much. I kind of fell in love with God. There's no other way to put it. And when you fall in love with God, you kind of have to fall in love with everyone. even your worst enemies, even though we don't do it perfectly every day. And the question kind of shifted in my life from, what's the meaning of life, to love is a very satisfactory answer for that, to how can I love more every day? And I was discerning religious life and starting my first company, which is still operating. It's a worker-owned cooperative vertical farm in Buffalo. And I just saw these nuns that I was discerning with just living, the most radical, beautiful form of the gospel, getting rival gang members to bake bread together and, serving the most dejected and forgotten. And it showed me what God was, what Jesus was present on earth. And I followed that kind of trail of discernment. But every time I went to the monastery, I actually couldn't stop thinking about the land. I'd walk through the grounds every day, and I'd see a lot of invasive species and opportunities for improving land management, and for pretty much multiplying the impact of every ministry of theirs. And so I decided to kind of follow that lead. And I actually, my senior year, I was confirmed, and one of the Jesuits I know connected me with someone in Rome, a professor at the Gregorian, and they said, "Oh, come to Rome, and maybe you can work in the Centro Alete." And I got that email on Christmas Eve of all days. And then I found this perfect little amazing ecological design program, and I had to discern, and it was the crux of working with a Jesuit for over a year on Ignatius's spiritual exercises, was realizing that I was so much more focused on the soil under my feet than the high church in Rome. And it was such a hard decision. I remember when the nun just saying, there are two good paths, take the third. And obviously the third one happened along the way too. So I guess that was kind of how it started. And also just a love of nature through my whole life. I mean, it's so, even I think science and studying ecology and science and doing scientific illustration after my first publication at 14, it's hard not to believe in God. It's just so amazing. Walking through a forest, it's, there's just, life itself is just so wondrous. And we have such a beautiful opportunity in stewarding it. I mean, I feel so strongly about that on a personal level, that I have a calling to do that, and we all do, but also from even just a emotional, beyond the spiritual, or you could say more superficial, an aesthetic sense. The world, when it's greener, is more beautiful, and yeah.
That's great. And now, one of the things we talk about in the context of the developing the project is an initial trip to Rome, to the Vatican, to meet the cartography team at the Vatican. And you got there and you came to find out something that was a little bit peculiar when you arrived. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So when I was 26 years old, when I look back, I thought I was old, but definitely not now. I was donated to pretty much run one of the top cartography teams in the world. And they had just, when I was first given access to this team, they had just finished actually doing the administrative 3 boundaries for the Ebola crisis. So these boundaries helped kind of, contain things in Africa, where we're looking at all these maps right now with COVID, with containing it by a county or by zip code. And they didn't even have that kind of foundational data. So I was looking for that for the church. I was looking for diocese and the data set for that. And I had been working with students at Yale's forestry school, looking for this tirelessly, talking to diocese, talking to people, and there was nothing. So I contacted the Vatican about needing to get this data set from them. And they, they said that they would meet with me, and just all this stuff came together that is almost inexplicable. Like when I first read Laudato Si', of course, it's kind of a almost magical moment, because it's like when a mentor who's older and wiser than you says something that is in your heart, but hasn't had the chance to really form into a realized or even verbalized way. And it was like Laudato Si' was so from the heart, and it spoke to me so much. And I learned that Cardinal Turkson was involved. And when the Pope came to the United States, I saw these women dressed in like these gorgeous African dresses that reminded me of the woman where I had done some agriculture planning work in West Africa, and I complimented them, and they said they're from Ghana, and I was like, oh, like this cardinal I just learned about. And they were like, oh yeah, he's my brother. So it's like all these crazy things came together to allow me to go to the Vatican. And I met with the Secretary of State's office and the third loggia of the Apostolic Palace. And it's lined with the most exquisite fresco maps that I've ever seen. And I was so excited to get this data set. This is like the last place in the world that would, that we hadn't looked, or even a hand-drawn one. The closest we had found was the Atlas Hierarchicus, which was, the boundaries weren't updated since 1901 for dioceses, and there was no unified global map of dioceses, and they were in multiple projections. I'm not going to get really geeky, but basically it's unusable. So I met with these monsignors, and I asked them, can I speak with your cartographer? Oh, we don't have one. Okay, can I speak with your geography department in the Secretary of State? There is none. Okay. And then I showed them the graphic prototype. I said, do you mind if I make this? Like, are there any security reasons? And they talked in Italian for like 10 minutes. And I totally was like, oh my gosh, can you get excommunicated for asking a question? I was so intimidated. And they were like, yes, this would be useful for everything. I also got to meet with a couple other officials during that time, including Cardinal Turkson, and I talked for an hour, and it was probably will be one of the highlights of my life to discuss Laudato Si and my plan for mapping with him, and hear about his own experience with Ignatian spirituality and with maps in Ghana. He was familiar with, the miners coming in and using them to take people's land. So it was looking at maps for, all of their potentials, good and bad, and discussing deeply how they could help realize Laudato Si.
That's great. I want to take a second just to welcome. We have a lot of folks from across the Ignatian family who are with us here tonight. So I want to say hi to some of those folks who checked in with us. I want to welcome Matt, who's with us from St. Francis Xavier Parish in New York City. Welcome to William, who's there in Buffalo, where Canisius is. Welcome to Guy Savastano, who's a teacher, a chemistry teacher at St. Ignatius High School in Cleveland, Ohio. Karen's a lay missioner with the Maryknoll Missionaries. Got Anna, who's an FJV. Welcome, Anna. We've got some, we got a call out for Cardinal Turkson. That's always good. Excellent. And welcome to Greg. He's a JVC Northwest staff member. So welcome to Greg, and thanks for being with us. And then Teresa, who's an FJV, was in Sacramento, and then also graduated from Boston College. So welcome to Teresa. We're glad that all of you are here. And again, if you're just joining us, we're with Molly Burhans, the founder and director of GoodLands, talking about this work in the context of climate change, but we're going to talk about not just environmental elements, but other ways that the project can serve the world, the global family. And if you want to share a comment or let us know you're here, you can place a comment there on Facebook or YouTube in the comment stream, or tweet at us using the hashtag ISNLive. Now, Molly, I think you have a little video that kind of gives us a little bit of an understanding of some of these maps. And so we're going to ask for that video to be played, and maybe you can kind of narrate a little bit of what we're seeing there. And then we can talk a bit more about the maps, because I think it's intriguing to think about this. So let's watch the video and tell us a little bit about it as it happens, and we'll go from there, okay?
Great. So this was a project we did in 2016 in collaboration with Esri's Green Infrastructure Mapping. So we mapped out with about 92% accuracy, we estimated, properties owned by Catholic institutions in the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and we tied this information to their contributions to habitat connectivity, how they're helping support ecosystems health. And you can see some of the data tied in with this. So this is showing core habitat, and we can go into kind of the landscape ecology of that if you want. It's really kind of central habitat that's really critical. You can see all of these different metrics that are tied with it, from wetlands health to biodiversity. And this was for every single property that we could really mine out of multiple data sets within the USCCB. This was one of the kind of bigger, what we call foundational data set projects that we did. There were major what GoodLands does required a massive amount of R&D at the start to even make it scalable or affordable to anyone. And these projects really gave us the foundational data sets and models, not just this one, but also the kind of first global digital map of dioceses, which I did end up doing with that team that I mentioned that had done the UN boundary mapping. So these were both major projects, and we've built on them. We have thousands of data sets now, more than I can handle. In some days, definitely more than, unfortunately, we can maintain properly, but that really show the landscape of the church in an entirely new way.
Now, Molly, when you talk about this, the idea of bringing all this data together, you know, when I think about the Catholic Church, I think about this amazing network of people with common values and commitment, and very unified in so many ways. But I also think about, you know, a really big organization that's hard to manage. Can you tell us a little bit about what it looked like to bring all this data together? Like, did they just lead you to some boxes in the Vatican basement, and they're like, here, and you take it and you just scan it and you're good to go? Or how did it all come together, and how much work was that?
It was a huge amount of work. And there was no box in the Vatican basement. I actually was just at Stanford University last month at the David Rumsey Map Library, and we found one other attempt in Atlas Hierarchicus at global diocesan maps from 1885 or 1858. So what we had to do was, and you can see this on the Catholic Geo Hub that we launched this fall with over 300 data sets, maps, and apps about the church, is that we had to use over 2,000 different sources that you can see documented, or it's about 2,000, it's about 1,900 different sources that we document in the metadata, and we had to stitch these all together to create the global map. And now that might sound like drawing a bunch of lines, not so hard. It actually took a team of over 20 experts to do over 4 months. So it was very challenging. And that was, you know, we did them at what's called a 1 to 3 million scale. So if you're not a total geography nerd, this means they're very chunky. And so this is intentional. This is a lower resolution. And you'll see this kind of low resolution Google Maps too. It prevents a false confidence, I would say, in information. The information is good, but it's constantly being updated. And some of the dioceses in like Africa, we had to use judgment based on parishes and locating parishes in their kind of different respective coordinates relative to the potential edges of these boundaries. So, you know, it was a massive, massive undertaking. The actual management of the data, I worked with an entire additional team on top of the kind of 20 different experts that came in and out of the project. It was full-time, I would say 5 to 10 people for that duration. And it wouldn't have been possible or at all without the generous sharing of data from David Cheney of Catholic Hierarchy. We did the geographic kind of piece that allowed the data behind Catholic Hierarchy to come to life. And that data is from the Annuario Pontificio, which the Vatican releases each year. And it's, you know, things change every day. The publicly accessible maps haven't been updated since September 2019, but, you know, bishops are changing every 2 days on average globally. It gave me a totally different view of the church from a global perspective. It gave, I think, the whole world in some ways to see that we're a dynamic body. We're international. Dioceses don't conform to geopolitical boundaries in many places. Like the Seoul diocese crosses North and South Korea. When we did the pre-shortage maps, which you can find online too, I cried because I saw how bad the pre-shortage was in the Amazon, in Latin America, in parts of Central Africa. And I called one of our priest advisors and I said, this is just so sad. In one diocese, there's one priest for every 65,000 Catholics. And he told me, you know, they worked with kind of innovative ministry trying to get lay people involved, but it was just, you know, I had this like kind of geo revolution in my understanding of our family. And it really it really got the interest of a number of places. I lectured at a class at the Harvard Kennedy School because it's been seen as a model, and a progressive model. The church didn't even know that it was being really progressive with, I guess, governance in this sense, but for meta-state governance, it's kind of a hidden India is what we are considered, of 1.3 billion people. And we're subordinate in many ways, in most ways, when it comes to what we believe is right, to our ecclesiastical leadership before our political leadership. I should be careful treading there, but so that's that's a really interesting kind of way that we've evolved as a community, and the geographical element brings it to a totally different reality.
Sure. Now, Molly, I'd love to talk a little bit about how these maps and this work can apply to different realities of injustice that our world faces. And of course, today is Earth Day. We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and we're getting ready to celebrate the 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. And Pope Francis tweeted out this morning, Earth Day is an occasion to renew our commitment to love our common home, which is not a warehouse to exploit. Let us care for it and for the weakest members of our human family. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about, since it is Earth Day, I'd love to hear a little bit about how, there's application for this data, for these maps in the context of ecological conservation, more sustainable behavior, institutional behavior by the church, ways of utilizing land and property to reduce the impacts of climate change, or to reduce the causes of climate change. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And then we can talk about some other issues as well.
Great. Yeah, I think it's going to be important to move from here to actually explain what we do with people rather than just sitting there making data. We actually contract with dioceses, provinces, religious orders. I think, it tends to only work if you're working with at least 30 properties in a portfolio. Otherwise, it's not really economically viable. What we first do is help communities know what they have. Many communities, even through the USCCB, don't have even an access database or an Excel sheet with all of their properties. This has gotten better since I founded GoodLands about 4.5 years ago, but it's still, we're lacking a lot of information needed to make critical decisions. Most of the real estate offices I've visited or talked with in dioceses are not thinking holistically about not just our most financially valuable asset, but one of our most powerful assets, probably second to all of us as people, for social and environmental impact. And that's our property. And they're thinking, which is completely understandable, about these assets as liabilities, often with numbers decreasing in some areas. The question, it's kind of this urgent, sell off something as soon as possible, get the financial payback for it and use that towards just surviving. So it's really hard to shift the mindset to strategic and long term. But we found that in some places, it's obviously unexpected places, people are thinking really, really forwardly with this. So what we do, going back to that, is we help you know what you have. So we create a digital catalog, but it's not just like a database. It's actually a database on a map. So you can get tons of information there. Then we help you understand what you have, whether that's the demographic context, whether you can map the number of students in schools. We've done a lot of education suitability mapping, whether you're looking at, the environmental context, which is so important. Which of your properties have the most habitat and preservation, which have critical wetlands, which ones have output sources into water systems that are really damaging and would make the most impact for, say, implementing stormwater management. So we help you know what you have, understand that, and then we take, what do you want? Do you want to care for creation? Do you want to create more affordable housing? Does your budget need to increase by $2 million in the next, 10 months? All of these things can come together, and the only way to really manage all these different opinions and needs and values is through maps, because you can put how they work are kind of like, I don't want to say like sandwiches. but better. They're even better than sandwiches. I don't know how to describe this. You layer them. You can put, I'm going to ask a question with a map. I know this is a Catholic property, and now I can see it has all these species of trees, or it has this tree coverage, and it has, this financial value. We're taking, consumer data now and layering it in. All of this data outside of the Catholic data is stuff that GoodLands does not have to make. We have a massive amount of donations of data through one of our partners, and NGOs out there. Some NGOs are completely dedicated, and university partnerships that we have to just making these kind of integral layers that help us tell the story. Maps allow us to take this multidisciplinary approach to land, this holistic approach to land, and we bring it together in the design process. And it's without maps and without this kind of data-driven process, you just can't really even do holistic or integral property planning. And you can't really do scientifically informed environmental work. I know it's going to sound very obvious, but you shouldn't do environmental programs, some of them, I would say, without understanding your environment. It sounds so obvious, but it's really, every major conservation organization I know, almost every environmental organization I know uses a form of geographic information systems to ensure that they're planting trees in the right place, to ensure that when you invest in the time it takes to get a grant to implement something like water management, which is often a multi-million-dollar engineering project, that time is used wisely for the property that's going to make the most impact on watershed health. If you're planting trees, you can compound their impact on social justice, public health, if you put them just on the right property. So much of this is about, being smart about what we do. Also being smart about real estate. If you need to finance programs or collateralize assets, being able to see where those opportunities lie within the real estate portfolio as a whole, and making sure that you aren't, say, selling something that is hundreds or thousands of acres, like a seminary or a religious order, without putting a conservation easement on it, but also helping make up for the financial losses of making land use decisions like that, which take away development rights. It doesn't really work if it's not holistic. And the most expensive part of all of this for us is just making the records. Once you have the records in order, the analysis is relatively easy. The digital integration into dioceses for location information is a challenge. It's doing things in a new way, so that's always a challenge, but it's a challenge worth pursuing, and we've walked really well with a couple clients on this who are emailing me regularly about wanting more work. I wish I could do it right now. And that location data alone, if we just stopped, didn't do the environmental planning, didn't do the holistic kind of triple bottom line planning for these portfolios, if we just stopped at making the data, it would change the world. And I believe it was the Gates Foundation, but don't quote me on that. They found that when they mapped for polio vaccine distribution in parts of Africa, infant mortality rates fell drastically, just by knowing where clinics were. Something so simple. Location data that we develop is useful for so much beyond what I have in mind with land. So one of the things that we do is we use a kind of the hub platform, which you can see that we've launched globally for the church, for dioceses. And these allow dioceses to leverage that data and maintain it and use it for their other programs. So I have been given so many beautiful requests for work beyond the land scope that use location data. Like one was a diocese where there's 42 different languages spoken, and people were getting last rites from priests that didn't speak the right language. So location data can actually help with logistics planning for things like that, very simply. Reducing even, travel routes for administering sacraments. There's a simple algorithm that's already developed in the platform we use that allows that kind of efficiency to happen. And, that kind of same algorithm is used by UPS, and it saves them $400 million a year in gas and time costs. there's a lot that can be done to really kind of change and digitally transform operations in the church. And the foundation of that will be location data. It presents its own interesting challenge too. We don't want to do redundant collections. So one of the things that I've proposed, and I worked on a white paper for this with a team that did the European Union's what's called spatial data infrastructure. It's a really technical term, but in the EU, their kind of mechanism, technical and policy to share information between the different member states has saved them, I believe, in 5 years, is $1.5 billion. These are not just really good in allowing us to make better decisions, these kind of back end investments, but they allow us to multiply not just making land for good, but making data work for good and ensuring that our partners can get a hold of that simply. Now, unfortunately, we haven't been able to go much further than the white paper, and I continue to work with that team on some infrastructure kind of updates for GoodLands internal one, but the kind of infrastructure to share location data among different Catholic NGOs could save, we estimated based on ROI costs, if we had implemented it right after the white paper was written, it would have already saved close to $500 million for Catholic organizations through reducing project redundancy. This is completely based off of similar infrastructures beyond the EU, including Abu Dhabi's and like King County. It would have reduced, data collection redundancy, and it can help people collaborate. If they see, hey, you're doing this project here and I'm doing this project here, it really helps bring the boots on the ground work together. And it also can help philanthropic organizations ensure that their money is going towards more kind of really high impact, high need areas.
Yeah. Molly, I want to make sure we get a chance to thank our sponsors here in a second, and also give you a chance to cough. So I'm gonna recognize some other folks that are here with us right now for a second while you get a cough in. We've got Liz, who's an FJV from Oregon, who was an FJV in Oregon. So welcome, Liz. We've got Mary, who's a Canisius class of 2013, so a fellow Ignatian, I guess you would call them. John Paul's joining us from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. Alex Vernon is from the Detroit Mercy Law Center at UDM there. Tim is joining us from Dotnet, who is a Dotnet alum, an FJV in Nepal, and now working with the Precious Blood Volunteers in Kansas City. Welcome, Tim. Marielle is a FJV from Phoenix and went to Canisius as well. Go Griffs, she says. Let's see, we've got, who else? We've got a couple more. Molly, Katie said class 2014. I think you might know Katie. Excellent. All right. Real quick, before we get to our sponsors, I wanted to ask you, you gave a lot of examples of application. Talk to me about our current crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the applications in a crisis like this? How can this data and helping people utilize it be meaningful in a situation like this? Yeah,
well, it's interesting, actually. Earlier this month, I was at Esri, which is, you've probably seen the logo all over the news. They're the main mapping software company behind the COVID dashboards that you're seeing all over the place, including the Johns Hopkins one. Mapping is well known as a critical tool for epidemiology. It's also essential for things even like defense, marketing, and integrating it into the NGO world is taking the best of these worlds. Well, epidemiology is great, but some of the other maybe less favorable things, and using the power that it's had to do good. Right now, we're looking at over 150 to 200 species a day going extinct. That's 1,000 times the kind of baseline rate. We're in an absolute crisis. And some days, the environmental work feels a little bit more like wiping the face, like Veronica wiping the face of Jesus, than of Christ going to be crucified, than really just building, saving the world. It's like, is this going to get there to that point of destruction? But there's also a lot of hope. With COVID, it's just another example of a spooky zoonotic disease that's likely caused by one of the big jumps in kind of animal to human transmissions, or through the main causes of those are deforestation and land use, which obviously is right up my alley, but also, intensified livestock and agriculture practices, illegal animal trafficking, antimicrobial resistance, which can be increased by, agriculture practices that overuse antibiotics, and climate change obviously kind of compound this increase in zoonotic diseases. And 60% of infections, the UN estimates, are zoonotic, and 75% of emerging infections around the world are zoonotic. So, these issues of the environment and health, or we could say Catholic environment and health, are so directly tied. And it's not only, making sure that we don't destroy habitat and kind of erase, the places where species that might have emerging, diseases might be more in contact with humans regularly in ways that are quite unnatural, but it's also an issue of environmental and social justice that's very geographic. We're seeing too people from, historically poor neighborhoods that have a lot more environmental justice issues, compounded health issues by these, so like asthma, cancer, heart disease, are disproportionately affected by COVID-19, disproportionately dying, and also disproportionately communities of color. And ensuring that environmental programs are focused to help these communities where these diseases and public health crises are often impacted by the environment, by the surroundings, and by what's going on in them too. Kind of, access to food can be one thing, compounded in that too, healthy food, it needs to be taken into consideration. There's no way to leave geography out of our solutions moving forward with COVID-19. And with just generally thinking about Catholic healthcare strategically, it can't be separated from Catholic environmental care.
Thanks, Molly. I'd like to give a little time out here for you to take a break and for us to recognize some of the organizations that support Solidarity on Tap. Before I do this, I want to share just an upcoming program that we think people will be interested in. There's been a lot of questions about the ways that the COVID-19 crisis might impact those who are in the migration path, coming from Central America, Mexico, at the US-Mexico border. And so we're excited to offer a program that addresses that exact issue. Through ISN Live, we'll host an event that brings leaders from Jesuit ministries in Central America, Mexico, the United States, and Canada to offer perspectives from throughout the region. It'll be this Monday, April 27th, from 2:30 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. You can watch it wherever you're watching this right now, on Facebook Live, YouTube, or on Twitter. So we hope you can join us on Monday to learn more about the realities for migrants in places like Central America, Mexico, and at the US-Mexico border, as well as at the US-Canadian border. So I wanted to bring attention to that. I want to make you aware of the sponsors that help make Solidarity on Tap possible. And so I'd like to share who they are. It's the Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, which offers an opportunity for graduate study centered on core themes of solidarity, spirituality, service, and social justice. The Marino Lay Missioners, who've been working with those at the margins for a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. You can learn more about them at mklm.org. The Jesuit School of Theology, located in Berkeley, California, which is an international center for the study of theology, with classes on campus as well as online. Dynamic, challenging, and impassioned dialogical study impels and inspires graduates to pursue ministry in a way that will transform the world. Speaking of transforming the world, the Jesuit Volunteer Corps is a full-time volunteer program that works for social justice while exploring spirituality and faith through a framework of Catholic Ignatian values for individuals between the ages of 21 and 35. Jesuitical is a podcast from America Media, hosted by young lay editors looking at Catholic news of the week and includes guest interviews. You can learn more at America's website. Also, JVC Northwest, which was founded on the core values of community, simple living, social and ecological justice, and spirituality and reflection. JVC Northwest is a national direct AmeriCorps program serving in 24 locales across Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. And you must be over 21 to be eligible for Jesuit Volunteer Northwest. I also want to tell you, just mention, related to the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, there's an opportunity to advocate tonight to kind of take our faith and put it into action. So I'd invite you right now, we're putting this up on the screen, you can take action to encourage Congress to pass important or work for important legislation that keeps our air clean and protects the most vulnerable who breathe that air. So you can text AIR to 202-800-1541, and that will give you a link to send a message to your members of Congress to call for clean air and to protect those who are most vulnerable to air pollution. And so we hope you can take action tonight to support this effort. Molly, we have a couple questions that have come in from different folks, and a couple shout outs to Sarah Signorino from Canisius College in the Office of Mission and Ministry says hello and thanks you for the great work you're doing. Lauren is a loyal Marymount alum. She's an FJV and a GIS mapper and landscape architect, and she's really grateful for your work. So we say hello to Lauren. And then we also wanted to, we have a couple questions. So this is from Natalie. She said, Molly mentioned maps being like sandwiches, which is an excellent comparison. Does crowdsourcing play into adding layers to maps that GoodLands is works with?
Yes, actually, we have crowdsourced some of our maps. Most of what we do is actually data mining. So we, get actually the most people I work with are software engineers before even GIS experts in our team. But the crowdsourcing, there's a really easy tool. We actually just built out a demo for the Vatican surrounding their recent events and document for World Water Day, which can collect information locally about Catholic healthcare facilities. Super easy tool. It connects directly into like the GeoHub and all the stuff we do. And it was originally developed actually for World Health, the World Health Organization, based on the recommendation of one of their GIS experts looking for a tool that could map things offline and crowdsource them. So yeah, it's an awesome tool. OpenStreetMap, we've mined a lot of data and enhanced data with what they offer, and that's an amazing resource out there, amazing organization. It's pretty much the Wikipedia of all things present on the planet Earth geographically, and that's totally open source. Yeah, we've done, it's interesting. We deployed a big survey for one of our early projects in 2016 with a religious order, and it was such a awesome learning experience. There were, we found that there were, offices working with Windows NT. This predates Windows 95. There's a lot of, if you're working globally, technical limitations. If you're working with a diverse group, even limitations of accessibility for some people, how much you can zoom in, how easy the user interface is. And this is something that there's a whole domain of this called survey compliance, which I know a handful of experts in. But yeah, crowdsourcing information definitely has, I think, its challenges with different structures in the church, but going from the paper, which is most commonly used, to the digital, which the Vatican Statistics Office actually just did this quite recently too. They went digital, is really important.
Excellent. And another shout out from Canisius, Deborah Burhans.
Hi, Mom.
Here's your mom. Your mom's a professor at Canisius? Is that how you ended up there? Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah.
So, hi, Mom. Thanks for joining us. We're glad to have you. And Molly, we had another question that came in just about where do you envision the impact of this work? Where is this work going to be in 10 years? What's your hope for the ways that this work can grow, and what gives you hope in this in the work that you're doing?
Well, I think that there's so much hope, and almost part of the abundance of hope is the abundance of darkness that we're facing. You know, the darker it is, the more you have to kind of find the light actively. And there's so much potential for an awesome future. I envision, like, if you ask me what my like heart dream is, it's really that Catholic environmental and sustainability programs reach the scale of Catholic healthcare. Catholic healthcare is the largest non-governmental network of healthcare globally, actually the largest globally. It's 26% of healthcare or healthcare facilities. Catholic humanitarian aid is the second largest to the United Nations, if you include all the member states, for providing humanitarian aid. And I would love to see Catholic conservation up there with all those numbers, just an international Catholic park system. You know, maybe someone out there, I mean, if you really want to let your imagination go wild, it's not me, found a religious order and we could have nun park rangers, and I'd be very sad that vocation didn't exist in my lifetime. There's just such a beauty to this idea, I think, of seeing Catholic conservation and environmental work reach that scale and scope. Now we have huge barriers. I think all Catholic environmental organizations together, we could agree that there's total lack of resources, total need for continuous massive ecological conversion in our own hearts and in the whole Catholic Church's global hearts and lifestyles. But we're getting there. I'm hopeful we'll get there. My timeline is a century. I probably will not be around to see it in the flesh, but you know, the resurrection comes eventually.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point when you talk about one of the things that we see in our work at the Ignatian Solidarity Network is the importance of personal transformation in the context of institutional, larger institutional change, right? And while our church is not a democracy by any means, we do see that over time parts of our church change, because the people within the church, the people, evolve in their behaviors and the way they approach the world. And we see that in our own country as well. So how important the kind of individual transformation is. Molly, we have one more question before we finish up tonight that we thought we'd ask you, because I think you're going to have something to share from it. It's from Marielle, and she says, the Vatican has pledged action in the Amazon related to climate vulnerable populations. Of course, there was the Amazon Synod, which I think she's alluding to, which has components of land use and land ownership. Has GoodLands been asked to be involved with any of that work? And I know that you've had some work on this front. Can you tell us a little bit about anything related to the Amazon or the Amazon Synod?
Yeah, I was pretty surprised. We actually weren't asked to be involved in that. I've been involved in a number of things at the Vatican. Like I just said, the water document, and been a speaker there in the Academy of Sciences, and helped out in the communications department with like mapping Catholic radio infrastructure across the continent of Africa. But we weren't involved with that, but it didn't stop me from making a map and giving it to Cardinal Turkson in his office that showed, and you can find a piece of that online. It's the where Catholic dioceses globally are the most important non-state actors for preserving biodiversity. So these are areas that are super duper Catholic, like the population's 90% plus Catholic. They're areas that have really, really fragile governments. So governments that are going to be totally dysfunctional when it comes to actually getting their stuff together to address something like biodiversity. They're going to be areas with tons of biodiversity. So you can see online in our GeoHub, we've mapped out where and combined data to show the actual biodiversity index for every diocese in the world. So super diverse, very fragile state, lots of Catholics, and also lots of land development pressure, which you can see changes over time from satellite imagery to measure that. And that told us the story about where the Catholic Church, where Catholics are kind of the most important actors, have the biggest influence in being change makers on the ground. And not surprisingly, most of those dioceses that are fall into that category are in the Amazon or in the Congo Basin. So I just kind of shared that. Some of my work, I think it's an interesting dynamic. I was given permission by Pope Francis to establish a cartography institute on a trial basis in the Vatican under the Academy of Sciences in 2018. That would be the first female-founded institute, I believe, in the history of the Roman Curia, if it got fully established, and the first scientific institution since, or at least practicing one, since the observatory was founded to establish the Gregorian calendar. But you know, I'm trying to renegotiate that contract to have additional staff and maybe be a little bit positioned closer to the Secretary of State. We'll see where that goes. But that kind of, you know, institution is needed. We found, not to just go totally rambly from the Amazon, but the Amazon is very politically, there's a lot of issues there politically, geopolitically, and with land and land grabbing from different actors of each other. And one of the really interesting things that I found is, not surprisingly, how political the work I'm doing is. It's helpful in some ways when talking to leadership, because there's nothing doctrinal about what I do, pretty much. Well, there's a little bit, but not a huge amount. And but it's, you know, when we mapped, say, the Honorarium Statisticum Ecclesiae, we found the Vatican had no geographic standards, and this speaks volumes to the international political community about their affiliations. They're still putting Kosovo on the map. They've acknowledged places like Western Sahara that the UN doesn't acknowledge for statehood status. And these are all slips of just their data management. But when you map them out, they tell a story often of what they're supporting politically. But the reality is, most of the time, I think they're not really thinking about it. It's just, yeah, it's that totally went off from the Amazon. So no, I wasn't directly involved. I did, though, through one of the kind of senior Vatican officials I know, who's the head of one of the departments. I did push in a map of the pre-shortage crisis to that conversation, hoping that it would help unify both sides to a more fruitful database dialogue. And somebody told me that people were looking at it in there. I don't know. I hope they were. I wish that they were making, you know, informed decisions alongside, you know, supporting the deeper theological reflections that are necessary for many of the questions that arose.
Sure. So important in these, you know, as the church tries to respond to the changing reality of the world, to really have data at their hands. So good to hear that you were able to make some data available to them as they engage in that process. We have just a few more shout outs. Teresa said yes to Catholic conservation with nun park rangers. And welcome to Liz, who joins us from St. Dominic Parish in Shaker Heights, Ohio. And grateful for Molly's work. And then, and Teresa also noted that the Catholic Climate Covenant here in the United States is doing great work on a lot of these issues as well, and great folks there at CCC. So, Molly, it's been wonderful to have you with us tonight. Thank you so much. I know you haven't been feeling well recently, so we appreciate your time and the work that you're doing. It can play such a vital role in the work of the church across the world to address the realities of our human family, to respond to you know, the deep call of the gospel to lift up the inherent dignity of all God's people, and to use data and to use maps and to use everything that's available to us. And so thank you so much for the work you do and for being with us tonight. We're so grateful for your time.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a quick shout out to
Please.
Anyone watching on the front lines, essential workers. Thank you so much for everything you're doing. Keeping you all in our prayers, and all the Jesuitical people I know out there. Great. And to see you, even if virtually, and just hope you're all well, strangers and friends alike.
Excellent. Thanks, Molly. And a few things. Next week here at Solidarity on Tap, we'll be joined by Sister Simone Campbell. So that's Wednesday, April 29th at 9 p.m. a regular time, 9 p.m. Eastern. Sister Simone is the executive director of Network Catholic Social Justice Lobby, and we're excited to have her join us. And the following week, we'll be joined by Sister Helen Prejean, executive director of the Ministry Against the Death Penalty, and anti-death penalty activist and author. And so we're really looking forward to welcoming both Sister Simone and Sister Helen Prejean in the coming weeks. Also, if you like the conversations this evening and want to share it or watch again, This and all previous Solidarity on Tap sessions are available at igsol.net/SOT or on our YouTube page. So make sure to check those out. Folks like Father Fred Kammer, Father Greg Boyle, Marcia Chatelain, and many others. So make sure to check that out. And also, if you liked what you experienced here tonight, please consider giving a gift to sustain the work of the Ignatian Solidarity Network, including virtual Solidarity on Tap. You can go to ignatiansolidarity.net/donate to support the ongoing work that we do with the Ignatian family and the larger church. Thanks again for joining us at Solidarity on Tap tonight. We hope to see you next week. Have a great night.